All right, Act 3, Scene 1. You guys ready? Let's do it. All right. If you have your study guide and also your copy of the text, I want to go through that with you. Remember that Act 3 is going to be our climax, right? So we're waiting for something to happen that's climactic, right? Does it happen in Scene 1?
No.
Not really. Although some interesting things happen, right? Interesting stuff goes down. If we go through the study guide, we can see that the first item is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern give an inconclusive report to Gertrude and Claudius regarding Hamlet's behavior. What does inconclusive mean? Huh? Right, they can't draw any conclusions. They can't figure out what it is that's giving him trouble, right? So what line could we point to indicate that the report to the king and queen about Hamlet's dysfunction is inconclusive? Where do they say that? Line 6, good. Rosencrantz says he does confess he feels himself distracted. So he says that he is off, that he's not, focused on what he should be doing. But from what cause, remember means he, right? That apostrophe A means he. But from what cause, he will by no means speak. So he'll tell us that he is distracted, but he won't tell us what's causing that distraction. Remember Hamlet gave that big old speech, what a piece of work is a man, and the sky doesn't impress me anymore, and the earth doesn't impress me anymore, and man doesn't impress me anymore, all that stuff, right? He gave that speech to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So they report all that to the king and queen, and they have a little conversation about that. And what's finally decided about that situation? What are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern supposed to do? Because they leave pretty quick, right? What does the king mean on line 26 when he says, give him a further edge? It's a footnote that tells you exactly what that means. Sharpen his inclination and drive his purpose into these delights. In other words, do some things that will entice him to give you more information, right? I don't know, maybe if he gets drunk or something, he'll tell you what's bothering him. So they're supposed to persist, right? They're supposed to persist in trying to find out from Hamlet what is bothering him, and they leave. Then the king tells Gertrude that she can leave too. Before she does, though, she speaks to Ophelia and says, I hope that Hamlet's problem is that he loves you too much. But that's not it, right? Who's all on stage at this point in time? We have the king, the queen, Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern, but they leave right here on line 28. Then the queen leaves on line 38. After that, if you look on the study guide, the next point is Claudius and Polonius decide to put a plan into motion. What's their plan? Do what? Right. They're going to try to make Hamlet and Ophelia run into each other and watch the interaction, because what's that supposed to show them? That they have a relationship, and maybe Hamlet's behavior will show that he's lovesick over her and that Polonius' theory is correct. He gives a bunch of directions to Ophelia, right? He says, walk you here. He says, read on this book, and so on and so forth. And then he says, we will bestow ourselves. He's talking to Claudius when he says that. Bestow meaning we're going to hide, right? says something really interesting. Polonius says, "We are oft to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action we do sugar over the devil himself." To sugar over the devil himself means that sometimes we take something wicked and we try to make it okay. To please our own actions. It's not as bad as something worse, right? Okay, so I ate half a cake. It's not as bad as murdering somebody. But the king has an aside as a reaction to that, right? And I think that this is kind of important. It's a little bit of foreshadowing. You can mark that in your text. The problem with foreshadowing is that you don't really realize it's foreshadowing until the thing happens that it was foreshadowing, right? So the king says, on this line, he says, "Oh, 'tis too true. How smart a lash." He doesn't mean smart like intelligent. He means painful. Like that smarts, right? "How smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience." Well, what's on his conscience? What do we know? The murder of his own brother. So at that line, we sugar over the devil himself, Claudius feels that pang of guilt. "Is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to the most painted word. Oh, heavy burden." So at least now we know he's guilty. He feels guilty. He feels pain at what he did. But we only learn that because of an aside. He doesn't say that to any other character because nobody else knows that he did it. He doesn't even know that Hamlet knows that he did it, right? All right, so the king and Polonius hide themselves, and then we have Hamlet comes in and does the to be or not to be. The details of that soliloquy are going to be for your homework, but basically if you figured out that he's still contemplating suicide like he was in the Act 1 first soliloquy, I think you're on track. To be or not to be is about, should I exist or should I not exist? Right? Which is nobler? Which is more courageous? To continue to put up with a depressing, unfulfilling life for how many ever more years that I have left? Is that more courageous? Or is it more courageous to take a knife in my hand and just finish it? Now, I'm not advocating suicide. I'm saying that's what Hamlet's saying, right? And he's like, I don't know which is more courageous, because it would be courageous to kill yourself, in a way. Because what happens after we die? You're sending yourself immediately to an afterlife that's a huge question mark, right? And that's what his speech is about. Right? So you're going to spend some time with that over the weekend. Oh, yeah, come on in. All right, questions about that? It's a famous one, right? It's probably the most famous line in the play. It's longer than just to be or not to be. More to it. And then he starts talking to Ophelia. How would you characterize their discussion? Starting right here on line 91. Well, the end of line 90. What would be some words that would describe their conversation? Stupid?
No, I said disturbing.
Disturbing? Okay, it's disturbing in some levels. Why could we say that it's disturbing? He's not very nice to her. Give me an example of him not being very nice to her.
The power of beauty and how she hides herself.
Yeah, he talks about how she was disguised, right? When I knew you, you seemed nice and pleasant, but he says you were just acting, right? God hath given you one face and you make yourselves another, at the bottom of page 61. Mm-hmm. In what movie? Oh yeah, this is that scene, yeah. There was a preview. That movie that I showed you was Hamlet. It's just a little bit of a preview because in that version, okay, can't say anything in this class. In that version, they take some scenes from scene 3 and move it into scene 2. So, like if you wanted to show all of Act 2, then you're going to see some of Act 3. Why does Hamlet think that she is betraying him? Because at first their conversation is pretty nice, right? She says, "Oh, hi, Hamlet." Something like that. Something like that, yeah. "Good, my lord, how does your honor for this many a day? How have you been in all this time I haven't seen you?" Because when did they break up? A couple months ago. Assuming because Ophelia says tells Polonius, as soon as you told me to break up with him, I did. I stopped seeing him. So that was a couple months ago. "How have you been doing all this time?" And he's like, "Okay." And then Ophelia says, "I have remembrances of yours that I have longed to redeliver. I pray you now receive them." What are these remembrances? What is she talking about? Yeah, little gifts and the things that you collect in a relationship, right? Like you dry out the rose that you got on your first Valentine's Day, and you're going to put it there on your dresser, or whatever, like letter that was delivered to you, little things back and forth, ticket stubs, etc. And so she says, "I pray you now receive them." And he says, "I never gave you anything." Okay, well that's pretty cold, because she clearly has them in her hand, right? Ready to give to him. Who walks around with that stuff? Wouldn't that be like the first signal to him that something's not normal? Because she's been walking around with these things for 2 months to wait until she ran into him to give them back. She has them right there. She's trying to hand them to him. So like his antenna goes up. He's like, maybe this is a setup. Something's not right. Who goes around hanging on to stuff from the person that they broke up with 2 months ago? You might have it, in a box under your bed, or who knows what, right? I don't know. But yeah, you're not going to have it right here. Oh, here, all these things that you gave me, and this, and this, and this. Like, why are you carrying that around? She says it beautifully, right? She says, "My honored lord, you know right well you did." Her job is to get him to admit that he gave her all this stuff out of love, because that's what Polonius wants to hear him say, so he can prove his theory to Claudius. She said, "Not only did you give these things to me, but with them you said such sweet, lovely, romantic things that it made them even more special to me. But now take them back because all those special things have worn off." Well, they're not dating anymore, right? And his comeback isn't about those things. It's about, are you telling the truth, right? Are you fair? And then he asks her, "Where's your father?" So he's a little bit onto it, right? He knows that this is not a normal conversation. And they talk about whether or not he loved her. He says he did, and then he says, "No, I didn't. I was the more deceived," she said. "Well, then you could have fooled me." There's this whole big thing about "get thee to a nunnery," which is another sort of famous line from Hamlet. And he's telling her, you might as well just go become a nun, because all you're doing, you, Ophelia, but also a lot of women, is just confusing men. Because you have one face that you give to the world and another face that's like your reality. It's like a two-face situation, right? She can't be loyal to both her father and him. And he knows that she has chosen her father because she did what he said in the breakup. And now she's his puppet in this situation. But when he says make yourselves, he's talking about all women, right? Women in general. Is that true that women are given one face by God but make themselves another? What's an example of that? Makeup? Yeah. Isn't it a little bit deceiving? It's not? It's not deceiving? A little bit? How? In what way is makeup deceiving?
Well, you think guys can like look like girls, like drag queens,
Right? Okay, well, I don't think that's where Hamlet's going, but it is true, right? You could get fooled into thinking that a guy was a girl if he was made up with all the details and the contouring and all that stuff, like a drag person. I don't know what pronoun to use. But it's false advertising, isn't it? What if she has blotchy skin or some kind of disease or a bunch of pimples? And then all of a sudden you see her without her makeup on and it's like, that's not what I fell in love with.
Well, then did you fall in love with her looks or with her features?
Right? I was telling the other class, did you hear about this story a couple years ago where this guy, I think it was in China, married this woman and she had never taken her makeup off at all in front of him before they were married. And after they were married, she took off her makeup or whatever, and he didn't know who she was. Like, he couldn't even recognize her. And so he divorced her. He said it was false advertising. He thought he had this beautiful wife, and it turns out that he had, I don't know what was wrong with her, but he didn't like it. But it's the same. I mean, just think about other things, right? Did you know that you can buy underwear that fakes it?
Fakes what?
Booty butt. You can buy underwear with the butt already in it. Yes, you can.
And looks ugly? How do you know?
Or push-up bras.
Oh, well.
Oh, wow.
Those are comfortable though.
False advertising. Guys, is a push-up bra false advertising? Yeah.
I don't wear it.
Oh, we're going to have the great divide here. What about those waist trainers? Oh, they don't even know. It could be that she's got a nice slender waist, or it could be that she's wearing a device. The crying is going to start over there any minute now. Or let's not even start with, filters and Photoshop, plastic surgery. Like you've never used a filter on your picture. Everybody has, right? But that's false advertising, isn't it? Catfishing. Let me just take somebody else's picture and pretend like it's me.
Wait, it's actually the same.
Yeah, it's called catfishing.
No. Oh wait, never mind. No, there's like something that like you can get like Selena Gomez picture. It's on Shane Dawson's. Yeah. You can like put it on yours.
It makes you look like somebody else?
Yeah, and it looks so real. And it's great. Someone has a lot of
You want to look like that person, right?
I know, but I just saw it.
I think he's got a point. I don't think that it's limited just to women, but he's in a position right now where the two women in his life, not just Ophelia, but also Gertrude, isn't she giving him a different face now than he was used to seeing from his mother? He's in a bad place with women right now. I can see him being critical. He says, you jig. A jig is a dance. And amble and you lisp. You nickname God's creatures. Oh, look at the little lammy puppy. Look at the little puppy. The puppy's so cute. You make yourself innocent like a little girl, which is endearing and cute. And you make your wantonness your ignorance. And it makes me mad. Mad is a point of diction because we could say the denotation of that word could mean insane or it could be angry. I don't think we should have marriage anymore, he says, because all you do is fool each other. Marry some guy who's dumb. because then you'll be able to easily fool him with all your little tricks. Makes sense. And his last words to her, to a nunnery go. So yeah, he's not super nice to her. And Polonius is going to have to think real quickly on his feet, because the king's like, I don't think he's in love. All right? Love, his affections do not that way tend, on line 158. But in between the reaction of Claudius and Polonius to this scene and Hamlet leaving, we have a little soliloquy. I hope you didn't skip it. Ophelia delivers this little soliloquy right here. It's a little one. It's a little soliloquy. She's reacting to his anger and all the things that he said, and she said, what a noble mind is here overthrown. She's talking about Hamlet's noble mind. Overthrown meaning the noble mind has given way to something else. And in this little speech, she says he used to be a courtier, a soldier, a scholar. All the ladies, you know, just knew that he was special, and even I sucked the honey of his music vows. I believed every sweet thing he told me. And now look, that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled all out of time. That mind that used to be so sharp and handsome and thoughtful is now just a bunch of ragged sounds. He's not the man that he used to be. He used to be youthful, and now he's been blasted with ecstasy. If you look at the footnote, she's talking about him being mad, insane. So she has accepted his madness. That's a problem. Well, it's not a problem for Hamlet because he's been going for that for a while. It's a problem for Ophelia. Because if Hamlet's gone mad and she accepts her father's reason for that, whose fault is it? Hers. If she sees madness in Hamlet and she accepts her dad's reason for it, which is that he went crazy because my daughter broke up with him, then it's her fault that he's acting like that. Then the king and the Polonius guy enter, and they spend all this time talking about what happened, right? The king says, I don't know, I'm not convinced that he's crazy. I think I'm just going to send him to England. He needs some time to cool off and straighten himself out. I got an errand that somebody needs to do over there anyway, get some money from the king. So maybe he'll, with a change of scenery, improve himself. Polonius says, all right, you can do that, but I still think that I'm right. Oh, does this guy give up? But yet, do I believe the origin and commencement of his grief sprung from neglected love? I still believe that this situation has something to do with his madness. Then you have one of those long dashes because he's changing his speaker. He's changing his audience. So first he's talking to Claudius, and then he says, how now, Ophelia? She's been standing there the whole time. Did she go anywhere? No. After that whole madness thing, the king and Polonius enter. She's still standing there. Finally, her dad says to her, how now, Ophelia? You need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said. We heard it all. Thank you. Goodbye. And then back to the king. My lord, do as you please. I don't know. I think Polonius was using his daughter. Yeah, for clout, but also to prove his theory. Like, he won't let his theory go, no matter how much evidence is to the contrary. And didn't he tell her back in Act 1, stop seeing Hamlet, I don't want you to spend any time with Hamlet? And then he's all like, oh, come over here and wait for Hamlet. Because the situation calls for him wanting, he needs her in that situation. That's pretty hypocritical. I don't want you hanging around Hamlet unless I need you to hang around Hamlet and spy on him. Or try to get him to say something that would help me with the king. And then even when you do, thank you, goodbye. You don't have to tell us anything. We already heard everything. You're done here today. So we have to think about the treatment of Ophelia in this scene because it's a little foreshadowing into Act 4. No spoilers. All right, so there's a plan at the end. Did I go through all these things on the study guide? There's a plan at the end, and what is the plot? Yeah. So Polonius says, all right, last-ditch effort. Let's do this. After the play, so everybody knows there's a play that's going to be happening. The play has a couple different, situations going on. Hamlet is setting that whole play up, and so he's doing some spying. And then now Polonius wants to do some spying because he says, let Gertrude talk to Hamlet and let her be round with him. Let her be a little firm with him. Hamlet, you need to explain to us what's going on. Like, this is serious. And it's not just that she should have this conversation. He wants to hide and listen to the conversation. That's weird. He wants to hide and listen to a conversation of a lady with her son. Right? Like, I feel like he wants to hide and listen to people a little too much. Yeah? He's nosy, right? He's like a, busybody. If she can't get to the root of what's going on with him, then fine, we'll send him to England. Or you can confine him where your wisdom best shall think. Confine him meaning probably keep him in a room locked. Because if you're going to go around acting mad, that's like, a ticking time bomb. We can't have that in the government of Denmark. Rumor's going to get around that crazy Prince Hamlet's over there, and who knows what he could do. And then we have the end of the scene. All right, is there anything that we didn't talk about besides the to be or not to be that you want to discuss from scene 1? There are those items where it says think about. Is there anything there that you want to talk about on the study guide? Think about whether or not Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are true friends for Hamlet. Oh, here's one. Whether or not Hamlet realizes he's being watched as he speaks with Ophelia. I got some things for you to think about. You're not going to like them in this scene. Number 1. Does Ophelia hear Hamlet deliver the to be or not to be speech? She's on stage at the beginning of the scene with her dad, right? Enter King, Queen, Polonius, Ophelia. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are there. They leave. The Queen leaves. Polonius gives her direction. Conversation between Polonius and the King. Exit King and Polonius to go watch, to get into their hiding spot. Enter Hamlet. Right. Also doesn't say if the king and Polonius, wherever they go, can hear the conversation between Ophelia and Hamlet. Didn't they hear Hamlet at the beginning of this? Right. If you heard the two of them talking, they must have heard the to be or not to be. Because look, and then at the end of his to be or not to be soliloquy, he just starts talking to her. Right? Here's the shift. There's Ophelia, and he talks to her. She doesn't enter. So does he mean for her to hear that? Does he somehow know that he's being observed and gives this speech not as a soliloquy from his heart to the audience, but as some sort of diversion to the people that he thinks are listening? Is he really suicidal, or is he just pretending to be suicidal as part of his antic disposition? I don't know. Maybe the future scenes will help us figure that out, or maybe they won't, but it's something to think about, right?